Go ahead.
Hello, hello, can everyone hear me in the room? Yeah, I'm seeing thumbs up. Well, hello, beautiful people who are joining us in person and online. My name is Aisha Abdullah. I am the Open Education Project Manager for Spark, and I'm also a steering committee member for the Open Education Association. So I am joined today by these lovely panelists who are also steering committee members of the Open Education Association. And I will not be speaking today, but I will just start a little bit with sharing why we're having this conversation, and even though we're part of the Open Education Association, that's not what we're going to be focusing on today. We're going to be focusing on this long title. I'm sorry, I'm out of breath, so I was just running to get a charger for my laptop. But navigating open education's path forward in the U.S. political landscape. So, do you mind moving the camera, because I know the online people can't see me. So, this is what I believe to be a very timely and important discussion, and I've really been reflecting on Adrienne Marine Brown's keynote this morning about how important community is, and even more so, how important it is to have difficult conversations that might not sit right with us, but it's also important to have constructive feedback and constructive conflict. And when we think about progress, how do we achieve progress without those things, right? And most importantly, a theme that kept coming up in her keynote was imagination. So how do we imagine and keep believing in a better future that centers open education? So say it in the most simplest of ways, we recognize that the current political and higher education landscape is not normal. That is putting it as simple as it could be. But many of these problems are not new for a lot of people. I really want to make sure that I take note of that. For people from certain states, people from certain backgrounds, these systems were always inequitable for them. So there are problems that are rising that are affecting people in both personal and professional ways. And as this landscape unfolds, it is important to have conversations about where does open education fit into all of this? How do we make sure that open education remains relevant? Because I believe that everyone here in this room and online is passionate about open education and sees the potential impact, the impact it has had, and the potential impact that it can continue to have when it is practiced. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my lovely professionals to walk us through a little bit about what we're going to discuss today. So we're going to start with the trends of open education in the United States, just to lay the groundwork. And then we're going to talk about current challenges and barriers facing open education. We're going to provide a little bit of perspective from each of our roles about what solutions could look like, but this is really meant to be an active discussion. We're going to be utilizing Padlet. So if you have a phone, if you have a laptop, I encourage you to bring it out, because surprise, we don't have all the answers to all this, but we want to hear from you guys the answers that maybe what you've been facing as challenges, what solutions you are coming up with that you have seen, or thinking about Adrienne Marine Brown. Imagine a better future. Imagine what open education could be, right? So throughout this presentation, we're going to encourage you, as my lovely panelists are speaking, to contribute to the Padlet and have a discussion. And then we're going to talk a little bit about open education as resistance and looking at that from a broader perspective. And then end with just focusing on the Padlet and the great ideas that you all have or challenges that you want to share. So I'm going to get off my podium, off my soapbox, and pass it on over to Nicole Allen.
Thank you for that introduction, Aisha. I'm Nicole Allen, Director of Open Education for Spark. And let me start with that. A little bit to set some context for the conversation we're going to have today. So the open education movement, or I guess the modern open education movement in the US, has largely been driven around the challenge of textbook affordability in higher education. Of course, the movement is much broader than that, includes many facets, but in terms of the broadest and most public narratives, that has been the driving force. And this community has always been one that is more about a common means in the sense that it's about openness as a pathway or an enabling strategy, as opposed to a single common end that we're all working. We work toward many common ends. But the language of affordability and the metric of student savings has been a very effective tool in being able to communicate the impact that open education can achieve. And over the years, as we've become more successful, particularly through the 2010s, the marketplace has responded and shifted. And the kinds of advocacy messages that were so successful early in my career, in the 2000s, that around student affordability and how expensive textbooks are, don't hit the way that they used to. Of course, they still matter in many places and are still very relevant and accurate. The textbook industry has responded by adopting new practices and business models that in many ways have co-opted some of our most effective arguments and the language that we have effectively used to drive forward the open education. So, and I'm speaking specifically about automatic textbook billing programs and the, so-called inclusive access and equitable access programs that charge students a fee for access to course materials that may simulate some of the benefits of OER, like immediate access and the appearance of them being free and frictionless, while students still have to bear the cost later. And at the same time, the growth of AI and other emerging technologies has stolen some of the relevance of open education as a cutting edge technology or innovative practice. And this is starting to show in some of the numbers. Bayview Analytics puts out an annual survey that looks at some metrics in terms of OER adoption and OER awareness. One of the statistics that I think catalyzed a lot of the conversations that led into the development of the Open Education Association over a number of years was sort of looking at the fact that OER adoption has been increasing more or less at 3 percentage points per year, according to Bayview Analytics, the way that they study that statistic. And the growth has been incredibly linear. And you would expect the growth of an emerging technology or a solution to be more exponential. And when growth is linear and relatively, small at something like 3 percentage points per year, it takes a long time to hit something like, 50% or 75%. So looking at how long that would take us. And then at the same time, looking at the growth of something like inclusive access or automatic textbook billing, that was able to make gains in terms of adoption among faculty and awareness in a very short period of time compared to OER. And similarly, these numbers have showed up in awareness of OER for the first time 2 years ago. Awareness of OER dropped on average among US higher education faculty. It has picked up since then, but still not gotten back to the 22, 23 numbers of 64%, which is remarkable. Like, I started working on this issue when it was 0. So we've come an incredibly long way, and that is a huge accomplishment. But I think those trends really indicate some of the point we are at in the open education movement. It's a turning point. It's a point where we need to start thinking about, what is our relevance at the moment? And what are the ways that we talk about open education that asserts that it is more relevant than ever at a time where we are facing, forces seeking to change our society, whether that's things like, commercialization and corporate capture of public goods or, erosion of democratic principles or restrictions on academic freedom or types of teaching. And how can we advance open education as a philosophy and practice that expands access to knowledge, serves every learner, and can create systems that really serve the needs of all. So that's the backward-looking portion of this conversation, and we're going to transition into talking more about what is.
Now, I want to share a little bit of what you'll be doing today. We're going to be talking amongst ourselves about what are these challenges that we're seeing in the current moment And as we think about these topics, we want you to share your thoughts as we present. There is both a QR code and a bit.ly link, don't worry, there's also a link that you can use to get access to a Padlet. But as we work through these different topics that we'll be discussing throughout this presentation, we'll ask you to please share your thoughts on what are the challenges related to this topic, what are the potential moves forward, and we'll walk you through that as we work on the Padlet later. But think about it, take your notes as we talk through each of these individual topics as presenters for our areas. And I'm doing the first section. So we just talked a little bit. The bit.ly link for the Padlet is at the bottom of each slide, so if you missed it the first time around, it's still there.
Thank you, Carmen.
So we talked a little bit in the first section about automatic textbook billing, what it is and why it's a problem, why it matters, everything else related to it. A lot of us in the OER space like to talk about affordability because it's an easy way to market our work. And that has been successful messaging, as Nicole said before me. We can even see in the statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, wow, there you go. That over the last 10 years, the cost of textbooks has generally stabilized, which is amazing. Until last year, when it suddenly shot up and we saw an increase, which, what do you know, kind of corresponds with something else we're seeing in the last 2 years, the rise of automatic textbook billing programs. Automatic textbook billing is one of these efforts that sort of markets itself as the real answer to affordability. As we just said, it's known as inclusive access, day one access, and the other things. It offers colleges a tidy solution. Just keep doing what you're doing, but opt in students to pay the price. They'll pay less. No one will argue that they didn't have their book on the first day of class, and you get the win-win of not having to actually change anything that you're doing in any meaningful way. These systems seem harmless, but they can be equated to a new big deal for textbooks for the librarians in the room. Where colleges are being locked into multi-year contracts that put students' choice on the back burner. As many of us have seen on our own campuses, publisher reps are even encouraging instructors to assign more optional materials and additional materials in their classes as required, because why not? It's all one cost. However, that will balloon costs in the long term. And as institutions buy into these deals, the cost over time may grow as print, rental, and ebook copies become unavailable. If there's no alternative to an ebook rental subscription, students have no option to opt out. What else are they going to buy? There's nothing else available. Even auto billing models that argue they offer lifetime access may be misleading if students can only access them through their LMS or through an app. And that brings me to a second issue in this category, platformization. Platformization is an issue we're dealing with across everything we're dealing with today. It refers to the reliance on individual platforms rather than federated or decentralized systems for sharing and communicating information. And it's left many of us with little choice in how and what we assign for our courses. As platforms are bought, combined, collated, and made defunct by their competitors, we're left with fewer and fewer choices for what we use for our learning management systems, homework software, and even our email. We can see how reliance on single platforms and systems harms us when you think about the AWS outage just a few days ago, when suddenly no one could get access to their classes. And you can see how this is related to automatic textbook billing when you consider that the platforms our bookstores rely on for managing and selling course materials are also very engaged in the automatic textbook billing market. Of course, college stores are not all bad people. There's a lot of really good people working in them, and they're not all doing this out of bad intentions, but the models themselves do need to be critiqued. Now, I do have a couple of quick asides about how open education can help with this issue. For example, we can work together with other campus leaders to develop standards for contracts with vendors that prioritize student privacy, agency, and learning. We can continue to promote the use of OER and zero textbook cost degree programs alongside other no-cost course materials. And we can invest in open source tools and technologies across the education center and staff that can support them. That's a big ask, but hey, if we're looking big, if we're thinking big, why not? So I'm going to leave us with that for now on one of the challenges we're facing and some of the potential solutions, and we'll chat more about it in the Padlet later, I think. Okay, so the next topic.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Williams. I'm on the steering committee, but also my day job is I'm managing director of OpenStax. I'm talking about sustainability in OER. This has been a topic that has been in the vocabulary of people in the open space for, I don't know, 20 years. Ever since I've been involved, which was started back in 2008, we've been talking about sustainability. And I think we've been grappling with this idea of like, what is it going to take for us to be able to maintain, to grow and sustain open resources, open practices over time. But I think it's really important that we also acknowledge that sustainability is not just about money. It is a multifaceted feature of our community. It's both financial sustainability and human capital sustainability. I was attending a session yesterday that I thought was just absolutely amazing, and it was about burnout and talking about lapsed advocates in the open space. And I think that this is really like important for us to grapple with, because we are working in a space that is sometimes thankless, that can feel like we're not moving the ball far enough up the field, right? We heard from Nicole that statistics were down last year, and we sort of look at ourselves and say, we're not doing enough. So we need to really think about strategies that allow us to combat those feelings, that allow us to bring in new energy so that it's not just always on our shoulders, while also tackling another big challenge, which is how do we get more money into this space? Because let's face it, right now, money is what drives things forward. So when we look at the current landscape, it's an extraordinarily dynamic period in education. Budgets are tightening across universities and colleges everywhere. Grant programs are under pressure because federal grants are going away. So where do they turn? They turn to private grants or states. And also what we're seeing is that funders may be shifting their priorities. I know in my personal experience is that a lot of funders are very interested in AI. And that means that they might not have as many dollars for open educational resource production or other types of things to support our current practice in open education. But I do think that these present both challenges and opportunities for how we think about the future of OER. So obviously, we need to diversify our funding sources. I think that open education has been very dependent on one foundation, the very, very generous Hewlett Foundation, for a very long time. And we're very, very thankful for everything that they've given to us over the last 25 years of their support. During that period, we've also worked to diversify our funding streams, going to states, going to the federal government. But we need to be thinking even broader than that, because there's only so many individuals that are wealthy enough to have these private foundations. And we need to be thinking about how can we tap into more grassroots opportunities for funding the work that we believe is super important. So I think back to the keynote we heard this morning and imagining a future that's bigger than what we have right now. And I think we need to be open to a variety of potential models for the future, whether it's including partnerships, shared services, opportunities for earned revenue, or hybrid approaches. And I think experimentation and adaptability will be the key to moving OER to a more sustainable future. But we cannot wait till the funding runs out. I think we're beginning to get little tastes of it right now. And so today we need to be engaging in new and experimental practices to think about what sustainability can look like forward, testing new models, piloting new sustainability practices, and building systems that can actually endure all of the tumult that we go through in education. So that's it for sustainability, but you're lucky because you get more of me next. I'm also going to be talking about accessibility. And how many of you know that in April of 2026, we got some problems? All right, good. I'm glad I'm not seeing no hands because there are some problems. So in case you aren't familiar, a year or so ago, the DOJ updated some rules around the ADA Title II requirements. And what this says is that all digital resources and files used in educational or similar context must now comply with WCAG 2.1 AA standards. These requirements apply to public institutions and also to the organizations and individuals that serve them. So OER publishers and creators also fall into this category. What it says is if you do not comply as an educational institution, for example, with these standards, people can sue you. So it puts the institution on the hook to make sure that they are actually complying with these standards. So the standards themselves are not really new. They've been the foundation for accessibility for a very long time, and there are best practices in place that have been in place for years. What's new is that these requirements require that everyone comply with these standards. And like I said, this is all starting to come into effect in April 2026. And that means that organizations must ensure that all digital files, their websites, the resources that they're using meet these new WCAG 2.1 AA standards. So that means slides, digital textbooks, learning platforms, ancillary resources, worksheets, homework sets, software, and any other student-facing materials must be compliant. We've been hearing at OpenStax, we've been hearing people who downloaded our PDFs, which were not AA compliant, having their school saying that they can't use OpenStax because they don't comply. So this is very broad. Now, OpenStax is working to update all of our PDFs, remediate it, make sure that they are compliant. Also, our website and our other tools are already WCAG AA 2.1 compliant. It's just the PDF that's not. But when I think about OpenStax, we have a fair amount of resources to be able to do this work. That's our job. But when we look at broadly across the open space, not every single provider, not every single creator of open educational resources may know that how to bring their resources into compliance, and it's not automatic, right? It's not something you just sort of put through a tool and it comes out compliant. So we need to be working together as a community to figure out solutions to help remediate these resources, to make sure that we don't lose access to our students don't lose access to all these resources, and that we also don't open up a hole where someone like another publisher can swoop in and say, all of our stuff is compliant. Please replace your OER with all this commercial stuff. Oh, and by the way, stick it in an equitable access model, and they don't even know that they're paying. So we have a lot of work to do to identify resources and guidance and partnerships that we can bring to the community to make sure that we stay accessible. Right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Linda. I'm Senior Director of Student Success. I mentioned at the Colorado Education and proud member of the Open Education Association Steering Committee. And just a poll, how many of you have state laws where you have to address equity in the work that you do?
Where you have to?
Where you have to. So I see about three hands. How many of you are in states where you have laws where you cannot have diversity, equity, inclusion at work or language or? Okay, so that's why I like to ask that question because it provides kind of a level set for the room. So I know much of the work that you all do and part of the underpinnings of the open education community is really grounded in social justice work, equitable work where we make sure that knowledge and education is available to all. And so at the foundation, much of the work that we're doing is under threat, under attack, and we are in situations where we're trying to figure out how do we reframe the conversations, how do we reframe the work that we're doing, and how do we find the resources where we can continue to do the work to be able to support student success, academic freedom, support practitioners as they're doing the work on the ground. And so there are a lot of restrictions that we are facing as a community on the work that we're doing. The good thing is that there are a lot of things that we can do in order to continue to move the work forward. So I'm going to share with you some things that I know that I've shared with others as I've engaged in some of these conversations and in some of this work. So what do you do when you have restrictions on some of the work that you're doing if it's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, the first is to listen to the conversation closely. So depending on your political context, based on your governance models for your state or your institution or your systems, really the critical thing is to listen to what is being said in the room. The second is to identify the needs that these people are sharing. So what is it that they're saying that we need to do in order to support student success or support practitioners or faculty or administrators or state level policymakers? And then the third is to reframe open education to fit into those needs. And so I know that might feel salty for some of us because we're like, well, no, we gotta say, we gotta do it this way. But I think our keynote today, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid really positioned it adequately, where that we have to find a common ground or reframe the conversation in a way that meets the needs
of the person that you're talking to in front of you. And to find what she termed the purple dwarf, right? That appeals to both blue and red and whatever color of the rainbow you might be dealing with at that time. In order to, number 4, build in how you will measure open education impact. So you have the evidence and you have the numbers that will appeal to that person that you're trying to make the argument for why open education is important to what they've identified as the need. So many of us in this room, of course, are tired of the affordability. It's all about affordability. It's not just about affordability, right? It's about learning, it's about teaching, it's about knowledge, democratization of knowledge, sharing new frameworks, thought paradigms, not just from the US context, but, First Nations, Indigenous tribes, other frameworks across the world. But at the end of the day, we have to contextualize the work based on who our audience is. And that is very hard work. It does require a lot of resources, both internal to you, who you are as a person, if you have to kind of have a conversation that is uncomfortable because it's someone that you don't necessarily work with on a regular or whose views are at odds with yours. But if we can have that conversation and meet people where they are and maybe find compromise. And then the 5th is to revisit the conversation as it evolves. So I know that people here have talked about being in this space 20 years and how it began with affordability and how we're at a different place, especially with the, the proliferation of AI and what that means, and a lot of open education and workforce and all these other things that are of priority and top of mind. And then number 6, reframe again as needed. So this work is iterative. It never ends. You're going to continue to evolve it, to reframe it based on the time, the context, the population, your audience. And it is exhausting work, but it is important work if we want our work to continue and to move forward. And so I do want to share a couple of resources that exist currently within our community here in the US context, but I know they're available internationally as well. The first is if you're in the realm of STEM, I know the Rios Institute, which is the Institute for a Racially Just and Open STEM Education, has a lot of resources on the website related to STEM and social justice. And then we have OFAR, for those of you that are familiar, the Open for Anti-Racism, out of the College of the Canyons and CCC OER, which is a great resource for those of you that are in positions where you can engage in that work overtly, loudly, and in people's space, which I love that. But for those of us that maybe are in places where we can't do that work loudly, there are additional resources. So I know Doers just released the Student Success through OER rubric. And for those of you that don't remember, this was like the equity through OER rubric that existed. That was reframed too, and it stripped out the DEI language, which did hurt those that worked on that, me being one of those people. But we really wanted to make sure that the resources really focused at its core, that student success piece. And so it is a resource that you can use, especially in places where you might have legislation that is anti-DEI, because at its core, at its center, it's a resource for you to support students, practitioners, and it also helps you figure out how to make the case to administrators of why open education broadly is important. So I hope these tips and tricks and resources are helpful to you. And if you have questions, as we've been saying all week, I'm here all week.
Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Buckley. I'm the Program Specialist at the Regional Education Board, and I actually sit on the steering committee on behalf of the National Consortium for Open Educational Resources, also known as NCOER. And I am here to talk about a major disruptor that has been mentioned several times already. And I would like to say it's very difficult to attend any higher education conference in this season without talking about this major disruptor, which is AI, artificial intelligence. Anyone experiencing any AI exhaustion or AI fatigue from hearing about it at your campuses? I was in a session yesterday, actually the same session that Daniel was in, and I overheard like they feel as if AI is just sucking up all of the energy at their campus. And so here we're hoping to kind of shed some light on Just some of the schools of thought that is within the open education community. So we have a couple of different views within our community that highlights the risks and the benefits of these technologies. So one school of thought is to have the AI optimist. This person is more than likely an early adopter. They are excited about the use of AI. They see opportunities for new technologies to boost the capacity of open education projects and resources and to expand reach among our students. And then on the other hand, we have the AI pessimist. I would call them the nevers. And they see commercial AI as commercial capture and hype that threatens the goals of the open values that we stand for. And lastly, we also have the school of thought of someone being in the middle. They see the benefits of both perspectives. So from the Future of Jobs report in 2025, this quote was shared. Every career field is changing and students need to understand how AI affects their future job. Whether they want to be teachers, nurses, business owners, or artists, 39% of key skills in the job market are expected to change by 2030 because of AI. So with that being said, we have educational systems and institutions that are under immense pressure to design and adopt policies that both require the use of AI technologies that are seen to be crucial to be competitive in the workforce. And then there's another option, which is this hot topic that continues to arise from conversations amongst faculty on campus, which is the idea that students are using AI for cheating. There's this new bot that's walking around luring and convincing them to use AI to cheat on assessments and to cheat on tests. And so the question is, well, how do we respond? How do we respond collectively? And so I am fortunate to be a member of Doers, and I'm a part of the Innovation Working Group. And it's under the leadership of Brad Griffith. Oh, I heard one woo. Brad. So under his leadership, we partnered with Meredith Jacob and Will Croft, who I believe are in the room. Yes, I believe earlier. So direct all questions to them. To spark a conversation about how choices about AI policy can complement open education policy and align with the principles of innovative, student-focused collaborative work. So if you are in the Padlet, you'll notice that there is a link in the Padlet, if you are here in person, that has a link directly to that report. Now, let me just say, this report is not intended to be a model AI policy. And I will say that again. This report is not intended to be a model AI policy. Our goal is really to spark conversation. And so you'll notice that there are 4 guiding principles. 1, to center student outcomes. 2, to engage critically with AI. 3, let pedagogy drive the policy. And then lastly, to support all of the learners. So a couple of key takeaways from the report, once you get a chance to review it, is that open education is a framework for our values. Student-centeredness, accessibility, innovation, as we make AI policy. There's room for it in open education. AI engagement matters for workforce preparedness. So love it or hate it, you have to help your students understand its strengths and also its weaknesses. Lastly, stay flexible. We're still gathering information about what will be useful. We do not have all the answers. And then I am going to turn it over to our next panel. If you,
I'm the director.
It's been a long. Some of the additional challenges that I definitely wanted to highlight for you are the significant changes in institutional funding. How many of you are having those conversations right now? Budget cuts. Drastic budget cuts. I know here in the state of Colorado, it was a 1 billion deficit for the state. So you can imagine what we will receive next week when the governor releases his budget for the state. So yes, everyone is nervous, and I know that others in other states are nervous. And that means that many of our programs might be jeopardized, or many of our physicians might be jeopardized at a critical point when we need these people to do much of the work that institutions need. Additionally, what is the relevancy of higher education? How many of you are having that argument now as well, right? Students are like, well, what's the point of higher education? But it's not just students or prospective students, it's also policymakers, it's parents, it's workforce. They're like, well, why can't they just come work to us? I was like, well, I don't know, you're the ones telling us students don't have the skills they need to do the job, even out of college. So like, what is it that you want? And so it's a difficult conversation. The declining higher education enrollment, and goes hand in hand with that kind of narrative of like, what's the value of higher education, affordability being kind of at the center of many of those decisions. And open education is a great tool to address some of those concerns, but it's not a widespread message across our administrators, our policymakers. So how do we make them aware of open education as a tool to address some of those concerns? Additionally, deprioritization of faculty members' roles as educators. So the adjunct, I always say it wrong, adjunctification of our faculty, or if a faculty member retires or leaves, the tenure track line dies with them, and they don't bring that line back. Those are major concerns, especially as we have all these new emergent technologies, and we're losing many of our professoriate. I have multiple friends that are their tenure track and they're leaving the profession. So what does that mean for our field? So what else should we be looking at as a community to try to drive up and develop as a community some possible solutions? So please visit the Padlet in order to start plugging in those ideas, and then I will pass it on to my colleague Joy.
Hi, I'm Lois Shoemate. I'm the Director of Online Education at College of the Canyons, and a proud steering committee member here of the association. And it's a pleasure to kind of take a step back. You know, we've heard a lot of the challenges that we're all facing. And I hope that we can also walk away with some feeling of hope, because challenges to our field are nothing new. Resistance is nothing new to us. You know, Nicole reminded us that in a lot of ways, the impact of open has been communicated through cost savings, which is wonderful, and that's great. And then Liliana also reminded us that there is more to the work we do that goes beyond cost savings. And, you know, our history kind of as a field is really rooted in resistance. You know, go back to some like, you know, Cape Town Declaration or the promise of OER. You know, those are older documents that really sort of ground the work we do in more than just cost savings, but truly like rooted in access for all. And what does that really mean when education is truly available to all? You know, who is being disenfranchised when we somehow close access to education? And really the work we do, we're standing on the shoulders of those who have always called for that to be open and available to others. And, you know, so I think first and foremost, our resistance is nothing new. We're facing challenging times, and that's not to diminish or belittle that burnout that we're all feeling right now. And one thing that we talked about too as a steering committee, you know, yesterday was like, but what does it mean to enact resistance during such a difficult and challenging and kind of troubling time? And you've heard it mentioned here, you know, I like to view open as a tool, not the end, but a tool to help me accomplish institutional goals. So that can be outside of DEI, but we have institutional goals to help students be successful. We heard from student panelists yesterday One of them in particular said, I just want to see representation in my learning materials. Well, guess what? That's doing DEI, but you don't have to label it DEI if you're ensuring that your students see themselves in the work that you are creating and the work that you are sharing for your students. So that in and of itself is an act of resistance, but it's also just doing the right things so our students can succeed. Well, my institution has a goal to improve student success. That's how we can do it. That's, one very like sort of low hanging fruit example. But we also heard from a student that that's what they're looking for. So there are tangible tools and ways in which we can leverage the work we're already doing in open, because we've been called to do this resistant work from the beginning. I think in a lot of ways, I don't know, I was sort of drawn to this field because we are sort of like on the fringe. It feels like we've been like anti the normal way of doing things. So this is nothing new to us. Like I've just found my people who are also, advocates around it as well. And I think, today, this morning's keynote, Adrienne Marie Brown, a lot of what she said really resonated with me as I was sort of connecting it to this thought of how we resist. Because she reminded us not only is change constant, but that conflict is an important part of change. It's easy to do our work when things are easy, but what does it mean when we're really confronted with our own values and beliefs? And I think that's in a lot of ways what has maybe drawn many of us to open in the first place, because there are values and beliefs that we hold that draw us to pursuing open. And so I think, again, that reminds us that we've always been rooted in resistance in the work we do. We now have to be maybe creative or strategic about the way we do it. But I'm empowered because that doesn't leave me scared that we can't keep doing this good work. We just have to be supportive of each other and creative maybe in the ways that we do it. So, I hope that we walk away from this and sharing ideas with each other and learning from each other through the Padlet that, our imagination is activated to keep doing this good work, doing it in the creative ways that we've been doing it. And as we move forward and looking ahead to the many ways that we'll keep doing this good work to meet the needs of students, to meet whatever those outcomes are that are set before you, that we can keep doing this good work to meet those outcomes, maybe just in more imaginative ways. And we're gonna head over to the pathway.
Next up, what are your thoughts on these challenges? What challenges are we missing? You can do them. Start having limited capacity.
Yeah, there's so much.
Already, you guys, both people on Zoom and people in the
Really
room.
hard to.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
This is wild. So starting up at the top with automatic textbook billing, what are the challenges you see in this area? Of course, a lot of things. People are saying there's a concern with censorship of resources. There's no transparency. Inclusive access is easy, less work for faculty. Because it's easy, that means it's even more easy for people to say, well, why should I do OER? How can we make OER easy? How can we make open education work something that's not seen as a hurdle? People saying, oh, it's obscuring the impact of cost savings. Because if we're saying, well, we set the price this high, then you save this much money by us lowering the cost. That means that people can say, oh, your savings through immediate access, inclusive access, equitable access is much higher than what OER, because we set the cost this high, just so it would be more than your estimate with OER. It could be difficult to opt out, which is of course a big concern for a lot of people. When we're talking about things regarding the US political landscape, I think one of the things we talked about with automatic textbook billing is how there was the rulemaking discussions last year about, are we gonna make it required that people do a students opt in rather than having to opt out and being opted in by default? There were a lot of discussions like, hey, this is great. We're gonna give students the choice to be part of this, and they'll say, this is a good business model. I agree with this, or I don't think this works for me. And instead that stalled out, and so we see ourselves in the place we're in. There are a lot of good possible solutions as well, and additional thoughts. For example, Potential solutions, have a clear status quo. Let's have something that makes sense. Products like My Open Math that provide free access to students and higher faculty satisfaction. Let's promote the tools that we know are good and easy and used. Make it opt in, not opt out. I already said it, but yeah, thank you.
Childless duck lady.
And having a good relationship with the staff person who liaises with our bookstore has been very beneficial. Very good note. It's good to have those connections to say, hey, I know you're setting up these contracts. We're gonna talk about the next part of the Padlet, I think, just so we can get through some of the other ideas people have shared. Sustainability.
Well, there is a lot. There are a lot of concerns, and I think that one of the ones that really pops out to me that I want to talk about is this idea of like unclear expectations on maintenance. Like OER is not one and done, right? We don't just publish a thing and say, okay, great. And I think, but what I also think is great is that it doesn't have to be just one person or one organization. It can be something that can be the community that, hey, great. We have heard, like, how can we add on and improve and make and update the next version? And it could be a completely different organization, it could be a completely different person doing that
Research
work.
methods in psychology.
Yeah, totally.
Edition 1, edition 2, edition 3 for Canada, edition 4 for Canada, US. It's great.
Yeah, and so I do think though, there may be this isolating factor that needs to be overcome, where, you know, things might get published somewhere, and then it sort of is just only known to that individual, where the source material is, how to take and adapt it. And so there probably needs to be some opportunity for broader sharing and de-siloing of the effort that we're all doing as a community. And I see that in a lot of these possible solutions as well, like this idea of collaborating across colleges for upkeep. I know that at OpenStax, we've had a lot of different discussions with the folks in Minnesota, Wisconsin, sorry, about nursing, right? Because they started a nice, amazing nursing program. Then we got some funding to do some nursing, so we didn't want to duplicate effort, so we sort of built on the work that was already done. So I think looking for those opportunities to sort of share the burden, if you will, is important. And then the other thing that I saw in here, and I think it says Eagles. I like the human view of sustainability, this human view of sustainability approach. We have to build something there, y'all. Like, we have to figure out how we support each other so that when we're feeling burnout, I don't know if any of you have been through burnout, but I've been through burnout, and it sucks. And you feel so isolated and you don't know how to climb out. But then you realize that a lot of that climbing out is actually connection, and it's connecting with a passion and sort of building a new skill. It gives you this sense of purpose and ability. And I think if we can figure out as a community how to support each other through that, it'll be a tremendous benefit. There's a lot in there, so I'm not going to touch on every single one, and I'll just try to pick a couple, and you also get me again. So the next one was about accessibility. There was a poignant point that I saw, which is like too much focus on compliance and less about like the practice of care towards students. And I think that's really amazing. A person who used to be really involved in the open community, Jess Mitchell, used to always say that accessibility is a journey without an end. And so you sort of always are becoming more and more accessible. And I think that is the journey that we are on. We're always trying to figure out, you know, how do we make these materials even more available to everybody, both in terms of access, but also in terms of their usefulness, depending upon the individual's capabilities. And so I think we're on that journey. And the idea is that we don't just have to focus on compliance, but we should be thinking ahead of how do we make sure that the new simulation that we're developing is also being useful to everybody, despite or regardless of their abilities. And so I think that focus on like a practice of care towards students is actually a really good one that we should take forward from there. And I know we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna pass it through.
Perfect. Well, I'll jump in with some of the challenges are, because you know what those challenges, right? the one that I do wanna, address here, from Texas professor, where we're sometimes not in the room where decisions are being made, especially as someone that has worked with multiple states where publishers are going straight to the CFO and the CFO signs off without actually consulting faculty. Faculty Senate, you need to get involved, you need to get your CFO to the table, and you need to put yourself in front of them and say, you should not be signing these contracts without the academic side of the house being in the room and represented. So that is one possible solution. Bust that door down if you can. But one of the things that I do want to share here, and I think, I appreciate Jennifer Jordan, whoever she is, yeah, in the back, because as someone that has talked to many people about anti-DEI restrictions and the panic and the fear and all this, I'll put myself out there. I am a woman of color, and this work is not new. It has been happening for over 200 years. And it has happened without the language of DEI, and it will continue to happen without the language of DEI. So if you are scared or if you're nervous because, oh, well, we can't say this, know that people have been doing this work before you, and this work will continue regardless of what language you can and cannot use. Yes, there is fear surrounding some of the work that we do in this space, but many communities in this country and internationally have been living in that fear for generations and centuries. And we've overcome, and you will overcome as well. So in order to continue to do that work, there's so many resources out there, and yes, many of us don't know of them, but how many of you are librarians in this room? Tap your local librarian, because trust me, they will be able to guide you to manifestos, essays, playbooks, memoirs on how to do this work and how to do it covertly if you're in places where you can't do it overtly, and other places where you do it loud and proud, and we need both. It's not one or the other. So rely on each other.
So for the technical, and I'll share two of the patent responses. One is from the Courageous Badger about, I know I love the name, accessibility issues for neurodivergent students, not up to snuff. And as we push towards OER and AI too quickly or without alternative options, we risk letting some students fall through the cracks. And that is not our goal. We definitely want to make sure that whatever tools we're using, that we are able to support all students. Now, what that looks like, I definitely think there's room for growth in this area. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Daniel mentioned, is that with accessibility, it is definitely a journey. It is not where we're going to get to a destination. So thank you so much for your comment. And then I'm going to move over to Helpful Ryan. There's real appropriate ways that AI can help to support the adoption, creation, and application of OER, but it will always need human involvement throughout the process, which I completely agree. I think that oftentimes when we talk about AI or generative AI, to be specific, that there's this assumption that the human will not be a part of this process. And our message is that we want the humans to be a part of this process. As we are working with students, there is nothing that will ever be able to replace the teacher or the faculty that is involved that's working with the learner. All right, I'll pass it to Aisha. Sure.
Thank you. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Internally with just myself. So I love them so much. So thank you all for that. So this is obviously just a conversation. We didn't solve anything today, but it's a step towards a better future, imagining a better future. And we're actually going to be continuing this conversation, having a more pointed conversation on what a national association can do to help alleviate some of these problems at our working session on November 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can find the information at opened.org if you're interested in joining that conversation. And I will also be posting the Padlet up onto Sched. So if you still have ideas that are coming in, you want to contribute it, we will all be reviewing it. And just thank you all so much for joining and being part of this conversation.
Thank you. I hope you all can see the hearts and the claps.
Yeah.
The tablet is bad.
It's nice to see the lights. There you go.